Chernobyl Disaster by Rumiana Stoyanova. The world lies in the human heart. The salvation of the world lies in the human heart, in the human power to be divided, in the human sense and human responsibility. We still oscillate in the destructive and vain belief that man is the most important of creation. We no longer know how to put morality before politics, science, and economics. Increasingly, we are unable to understand that the only common pillar of all activities, if they must be moral, is responsibility. Responsibility is something higher than the idea of my family, my country, my company, my success. When we talk about environment, what do you think first? The Eurobarometer provides answers that include climate change, urban pollution, nature protection, human-caused disasters such as oil spills, industrial incidents, earthquakes, floods, and other natural disasters, and the consumption of natural resources. Not surprisingly, the most important problem varies from country to country, such as water pollution in the Baltic Sea for citizens of the Baltic states, while in Malta and Bulgaria it is air pollution. Among many environmental problems and natural disasters now, we are going to discuss one of the most terrifying industrial incidents caused by human and its effect on the environment and human population. In the early morning of 26th of April 1986, the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in the former Soviet Union territory of Ukraine exploded, creating what is usually described as the worst nuclear disaster the world has ever seen. The disaster spread radioactivity into the atmosphere in one of the largest bursts of unintentional radioactive release into the environment. Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus were subjected to significant exposure following the event, and the rest of Europe was on red alert. No one in the area, including the nearby town of Pripyat, built in 1970s for the factory workers, were evacuated in the first 36 hours after the incident. The radiation was already being spread to Sweden. After initially denying any incident, on April 18, the Soviet Union made a brief statement. Years of independent research and government investigation followed as the world tried to calculate the extent of the damage caused by the disaster. Today, on the infographic show, we take a look at the aftermath at this tragic event and see if the event was as disastrous as first predicted. Let's take a look at the worst effects of the Chernobyl disaster. Just over 8 miles north of Kiev and about 12 miles south of Belarus, 4 reactors stood next to the reservoir fed by the Pripyat River and close to the town of the same name with population of 100,000 when the disaster struck. The town of Chernobyl was inhabited by 12,000 people, and the rest of the land surrounding was predominantly farms and woodland. Water from the Pripyat River was used to cool the reactors, as in most nuclear power plants. The reactor used at Chernobyl, the RBMK-1000, is now, however, well known to have design flaw in the cooling system. On April 25th, plant operators were making preparations for a maintenance shutdown. In the early hours of the 26th, hot fuel rods were lowered into the cooling water, creating steam, and owing to that design flaw, a power surge caused an explosion, killing 2 plant workers immediately. For the following few days, emergency crews attempt to contain the fires and radiation leaks. As more plant workers became exposed to the radiation, they later died of radiation sickness, but fortunately most of the radiation leaked had a relatively short half-life of 8 days. A day after the event, on the 27th April 1986, the town of Pripyat was evacuated. Many of the townspeople suffering headaches, vomiting, and other indicators of radiation sickness. In the months following the event, 28 plant workers died, and this number grew to 31 after 3 months. In addition, over 600 cancer cases have been linked to the event. However, the true number of cases attributed to the event is near impossible to calculate, as people naturally suffer from various cancers. Many doctors in Eastern Europe advised pregnant women to abort their unborn children for fear of them bearing children with birth defects. The trees in the surrounding woodland were killed from the radiation, and the region became known as the Red Forest, owing to the color the flora turned after the radiation exposure. The contaminated trees were torn down and buried in purpose-dug trenches. Shortly after the disaster, birds living in the area were found to have developed with smaller brains. Swallows in the area demonstrated albino plumage, deformed feet, tail feathers, and tumors. Some cattle born after the event exhibited signs of radioactive mutations. Despite this recent explosion in fauna, experts predict that the area will not be fit for human habitation for another 200,000 years. Post-disaster, children seem to have been most affected in the form of thyroid cancer outbreak, caused by the absorption of iodine-131 into the thyroid gland in children in Ukraine and Belarus. Studies show that adults were less affected, and the children who were youngest during the incident was most at risk. Before the event, the cases of thyroid cancer in Belarus were under 1 case per million people. By 1995, cases were up to 100 per million people. Clearly, the nuclear event was to blame for this upswing. In West Germany, Down syndrome peaked for some 9 months, with a cluster of 12 cases born in January 1987 that may have been connected to the disaster. Scientists are divided in prediction the number of cancer deaths we can expect over the next 20 years, with the report suggesting a further 4,000 people will die of cancer. But there is another perspective. During the disaster, radiation in large volumes kills living things, but amazingly, the flora and fauna surrounding the plant has learned to thrive and in some cases benefit from the radiation. For example, a fungus exists that uses radiation to produce its own energy source, much the way solar panels use sunlight. The radiotrophic fungi perform radiosynthesis using melanin pigment to convert gamma radiation into chemical energy growth. The absence of humans has allowed mammals to thrive. Chernobyl's severe exclusion zone combined to stretch of 1,600 square miles, making it one of the largest wild animal sanctuaries in Europe. The region nowadays has become one of the world's most thriving wildlife sanctuaries, hosting thriving numbers of deer, wolves, boar, elk, bear, eagles, and other species scarcely found in other surrounding regions. Motion sensing camera traps in the exclusion zone have captured many mammals who appear to be enjoying the absence of humans. Human activities like overhunting and wiping out animal habitats are known for cripple animal population, so it stands to reason that the lack of humans in the area also limits danger to animals. Red fox thrives in the exclusion zone, Chernobyl. The endangered species of wild horse are The endangered species of wild horse was brought in the area of 1990s. Privyetsky horses are considered to be the only true breed of wild horse since the species evolved from feral domestic horse breeds. The experiment has been successful. The horses are thriving due to the lack of human interference. Scientists believe the population of the endangered species continues to increase. The horses that were brought in from zoos and other locations mostly died off, while the ones that previously roamed the nearby area before being introduced to the exclusion zone adapted well to the environment. They bred and formed the foundation of future generations. Wolves in Chernobyl are doing especially well. The wolf population in Chernobyl is said to be thriving so much that the scientists were able to locate a wolf pack simply by following and listening to the wolf response. While it remains a debate between scientists as how well the wildlife is thriving in the exclusion zone compared to outside area, at least one animal population appears to be doing especially well in the contaminated area. The wolf population in the exclusion zone is 7 times than the outside areas. Drawn there by the abundance of prey, habitat unmolested by humans, and limited competition with other predators, many wolves have made the contaminated area their new home. The success of the wolves while herding is also concerning for some researchers who are alarmed by what it could mean for the future wolves in the area. It's also easy to observe signs of nature engineering. The booming Ukrainian beaver population has left its fingerprints everywhere, knocking down trees, buildings, dams, and drastically changing the landscape of the area. Another interesting perspective is the tourism in Chernobyl. In 2011, Ukraine opened up the area for tourists wishing to see firsthand the effects of the disaster. My perspective and experience with the disaster is as follows. I was 1 year old when the incident in Chernobyl happened. Radiation pollution affected the territory of 17 countries, among which was my country as well. The USSR reported the accident after 2 days, with a harmless message broadcast on radio and television only on April 28 in the evening after a Swedish station detected excessive radiation. In Bulgaria, until the 3rd day, there were no official announcement and the media were silent. When the authorities finally reported the accident, the case was presented as something limited and not dangerous, particularly emphasized in the claim that there is absolutely no danger for the citizens. On May 2nd, as many radioactive substances were deposited over Bulgaria. During the period April 30th, May 2nd, the radioactive air pollution in the country increased several times. According to eyewitnesses' accounts, while Bulgarian citizens consumed dangerous food and water, huge quantities of imported food were provided for the people of higher rank from the party. And now, 34 years after the incident, I see the damage of the disaster everywhere, even in my family. 2 of my family members were diagnosed with thyroid cancer, and these are the sad news. That's why I feel so sensitive about Chernobyl, and I blame the incompetent, unmoral politics driven by personal benefits for causing this terrible tragedy. In conclusion, while Chernobyl was a disaster event, we have learned much about the dangers of nuclear radiation, and consequently and hopefully, the knowledge will help us understand nuclear energy and personal responsibility.